town of Hillcrest, located in Alberta's Crowsnest Pass, was a community fueled by coal. The Hillcrest Coal and Coke Company, founded by Charles Plummer Hill in January 1905, sparked construction of a nearby community, with production at the Hillcrest mine starting later that same year. Hill began to work the mine before he sold it to several interests, including the Canadian Pacific Railway, who built a spur line towards the new Hillcrest mine. By 1907, it was estimated that the mine was producing as much as 1,300 tons of coal per day, and the town of Hillcrest had grown to over 1,000 occupants. Workers at the mine enjoyed steady employment, and many considered the mine to be one of the safest in the entire region. However, luck at Hillcrest would soon change, and on June 19, 1914, an explosion at the mine took the lives of 189 men, in what is Canada's worst coal mining disaster, and what was considered to be the world's third worst mine disaster at that time. On the morning of June 19th, 237 miners entered the mine for another day of work. Fire boss William Adkin completed his mine inspection and posted a notice stating that there were low levels of methane gas and some cave-ins at various parts of the mine. Despite this proclamation, at approximately 9:30 a.m., an explosion tore through the tunnels, up the slopes, and burst from the entryways of the mine. The explosion was large enough that it was reported that the concrete building located 20 feet from the mouth of the mine had its roof blown clean off. Joe Aitchison was the first man to be rescued from the mine, unconscious after the explosion. When he finally awoke 3 hours later, he stated, "It was as if I'd suddenly gone deaf, or as if 2 4-inch nails had been driven into my ears. That's how it felt. I was bowled over by the shock and scrambled to my feet. Almost instantly, black smoke began to come around the slant." The explosion consumed all available oxygen in the mine, and carbon dioxide gas began to rise to fatal levels. Carbon dioxide levels of 13% are enough to cause someone to lose consciousness, and after the explosion, it's believed that levels were as high as 50%, more than enough to kill everyone inside the mine. As soon as the explosion happened, General Manager John Brown ran to the fan room and reversed the suction of the air to push oxygen into the mine in hopes that it would save miners trapped underneath. This action likely saved dozens of lives near the mouth of the mine. The Calgary Herald newspaper described the aftermath of the explosion. "The scenes around the mine tell a terrible tale of havoc wrought at the fearful force of the explosion. It's only with the greatest difficulty the gangs of rescuers, armed as they are with the latest scientific devices for life-saving in such cases, can make any headway. Men, horses, timber, and wagons are all jumbled in a chaotic mass, and the path is strewn at every step with debris, so that only those men who were fortunate enough to have been working near the pit mouth had any chance of being brought out alive." Rescue efforts were attempted, but were hampered by the complete destruction of one of the mine's entrances. Rescue trains were immediately dispatched from Calgary, Lethbridge, and Fernie. 6 gangs of men used pulmotors and wore special gear to protect them from the dangerous fumes, to clear the mine entrance and rescue anyone they could. However, any man with mining experience knew that there was no way anyone working inside the innermost pit of the mine would come out alive. George Vickers stated, quote, "The mine was still heavily impregnated with gas, and it was with difficulty that the researchers worked their way to places where the men had been working. 3 of the rescuing party were overcome by gas and had to be carried out. When we reached the death trap, we saw bodies strewn in every direction and lying in every conceivable position. By 11:30 a.m., just 40 men had escaped from the mine." Smoke from the underground fires billowed into the air, and coal cars began to arrive at the surface, carrying the charred, disfigured, and unrecognizable bodies of the suffocated miners. The bodies were taken to the warehouse where they were cleaned and identified, if possible, and then were taken to the miners' hall in the village, 800 feet below the main slopes. Police were on hand to provide crowd control as loved ones surged forward to find out if they'd lost a relative or a friend in the disaster. The Winnipeg Tribune stated, quote, "Wives and children wept together, and every strong man broke down and bowed their heads to the inevitable. Widows were led away from the last fond gaze of all that is mortal of their husbands, and the moist eyes of onlookers were not a few." Of the 237 men who entered the mine that day, only 48 were rescued, with almost 20% of the town's population perishing in the disaster, leaving 90 women widowed and 250 children who lost their fathers. In the days that followed, an effort was mounted to recover the bodies of the deceased, and all of the bodies, save for one, were finally found. Many of those who died were buried in 2 mass graves at the Hillcrest Cemetery, and the Winnipeg Tribune described the funeral as one of the saddest in Canada's history. Quote, "The funeral was an impressive one, all the more on account of the number of internments. Of those who died, only 17 had been born in Canada and 2 from Alberta. The rest were immigrants who'd come to the country looking for a better life." Condolences began to pour in from across Canada, including a brief message from King George V. Quote, "I'm grieved to hear through the press of this terrible disaster at Hillcrest coal mine, by which it is feared hundreds have lost their lives. Please express my deepest sympathy with the sufferers and also the families of those who have perished." A royal commission was quickly launched to determine the cause of the disaster, along with police investigations and a coroner's inquest. These found that there'd been a methane gas explosion, which caused a flare-up of coal dust and resulted in a coal dust explosion. However, it's not known what ignited the methane gas, which could have been any number of things, including a rock fall, a lamp flare, an electrical cable short, or even somebody disobeying rules and lighting a cigarette. One of the mine pit bosses stated that he believed the first explosion was caused by gunpowder used in blasting, and the second explosion was set off by the first. The disaster prompted improvements in the province to workers' compensation and mine safety legislation. One of these changes was that every mine had to have its own rescue team trained and ready with self-contained breathing apparatus to get in right away in case of a rescue. 6 months after the incident, the Hillcrest mine reopened, and operations continued, albeit on a much smaller scale. In 1938, the mine owners went into liquidation, and the mine was officially closed on December 2nd, 1939. A monument to the Hillcrest mine disaster has been placed at the site of the Hillcrest Cemetery, a small remembrance of the victims of Canada's worst mining disaster and one of the worst disasters in Canadian history.